The room was eerily quiet except for the soft rustling of paper, the sound of a child's labored breathing, and the faint hum of the refrigerator. The air felt heavy, as if it was holding something back, something unspeakable. She sat alone, at the small kitchen table, her tiny hands clutching a piece of bread. The bread was dry, stale, and barely edible, but it was all she had. She hadn't eaten anything since the day before, and even then, it had been only a few crumbs. Her stomach growled, but the hunger was a dull ache, a constant companion she had learned to ignore. Her face, streaked with tears, was a mixture of fear and hopelessness. She looked at the bread, then up at the empty chair across from her. The silence was deafening. The once lively house felt like a tomb now. She had never been this hungry before. The kind of hunger that gnaws at your insides, making you feel as though you might collapse at any moment. She had seen her mother try to fight it too, but it was only getting worse. Her mother's efforts, once filled with hope, had all but disappeared. The bills piled up, the lights flickered, and the cupboards grew emptier. She wondered if anyone even remembered them. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. Her heart skipped a beat. Her mother wasn't due home yet, and there were no other visitors. She wiped her tears quickly, trying to make herself presentable. It wasn't much, just a few smudges wiped away from her face. She shuffled across the room slowly, her feet dragging against the cold floor. The knock came again, a little louder this time. She hesitated for just a moment before opening the door. Standing in the doorway was a man, tall, well-dressed, and looking out of place in the rundown neighborhood. His suit was perfectly pressed, his shoes shining brightly despite the dim lighting. He looked down at her, his gaze softening for a brief moment before returning to the serious expression that seemed to be permanently etched on his face. "Excuse me, young lady," he said, his voice low and steady. "Is your mother home?" She stared at him for a moment, confused. Who was this man? She didn't know anyone who dressed like him. Her mind raced, trying to process the situation. "No," she finally whispered. "She's not home yet." That man stood there, his eyes scanning the small house behind her. He shifted on his feet, as though deciding something. "I see," he said, his tone thoughtful. "I was just passing by, and I saw you through the window. I couldn't help but notice. Are you okay?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in a long time. Not really. Sure, people asked the usual questions, like "How are you?" or "What's up?" but no one had ever asked if she was okay. Not really. She shook her head slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek again. The pain of it all, the hunger, the loneliness, it all hit her in that moment. She felt a lump rise in her throat. She didn't know how to answer him. What could she say? She couldn't even remember the last time she felt truly okay. I can't eat this anymore," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not enough." The man's eyes softened, but his face remained unreadable. He looked down at the stale bread in her hands, then back at her. The silence between them felt thick, almost like it was waiting for something. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wallet. The gesture was so smooth, so deliberate, that it almost felt rehearsed. "I don't know what your situation is, but I'd like to help," he said quietly. She blinked, looking at him in disbelief. Help? Who was this man, and why was he standing here, offering her help? She wasn't used to kindness, especially not from strangers. "Help," she repeated, still not sure if she understood. "Yes," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I can help you. I can get you something to eat. Something better than this." She stared at the bread in her hand. It felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of how little they had. She could feel her stomach tighten in hunger, but the thought of someone, especially this man, offering help felt almost too strange to believe. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice shaky. "You don't even know me." The man paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as he seemed to choose his words carefully. "Because I couldn't stand to see someone go hungry when I have the means to do something about it." She wasn't sure what to make of his words. They didn't sound like something people said in her neighborhood. It was too foreign, too disconnected from the reality she knew. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know what's happening. My mum." Her voice trailed off as she thought about her mother, out there somewhere, working hard to try and make things better. But it wasn't working, and every day felt like a battle they were losing. The man's expression softened. He stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your mother must be doing everything she can," he said softly. But sometimes, we need a little help. Don't be afraid to ask for it. She felt a lump form in her throat again, and for the first time in weeks, something like hope flickered inside her. Could this really be happening? Could someone actually want to help? I don't know how to ask for help, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, the man replied firmly. No one should have to go through this alone. For a moment, she just stared at him, unsure of what to do or say. She wasn't used to kindness, to being offered something she couldn't repay. But his words, they felt different, real, like someone actually cared. I don't know what to do, she whispered. The man smiled slightly, a warm, genuine smile that made something in her chest tighten. He looked down at her, his gaze softening. You don't need to do anything, not yet. Just know that there's help available, and when you're ready, I'll be here. She didn't know what to make of him, or what to say next, but in that moment, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe someone cared after all. The man turned to leave, but before he did, he paused and looked back at her. Take care of yourself, he said, his voice gentle, and with that, he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a long time, she just stood there. Her heart raced in her chest, her mind whirling with the strange encounter. Could this really be happening? Could someone like him, someone so far removed from her life, actually care enough to offer help? The sound of her mother's car pulling into the driveway broke her reverie. She quickly wiped her tears away, unsure of what to say. But deep down, something had changed. Something had shifted inside her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like there might be hope, and that thought, strange as it was, filled her with a kind of warmth she hadn't felt in ages. The next few hours felt like a blur to her. She had gone back to the table, the stale bread still in front of her, but her mind was far from it. The encounter with the man kept replaying in her thoughts, each time feeling more surreal. She couldn't shake the feeling of confusion, mixed with a sense of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. Who was he? Why would someone like him offer help to someone like her? Her mother arrived home just before dusk, her tired eyes not missing a beat as she stepped through the door. She was carrying bags, a few cans of food, and some fresh produce. But it was clear from the way she walked that her day had been long, and not in the way it should have been. She had grown quieter over the past few months, her usual energy drained by the weight of their struggles. Hey sweetie, her mother said as she dropped the bags onto the counter, looking over at her daughter. How was your day? The little girl didn't respond at first. Her eyes were distant, still lost in the thoughts that had consumed her all afternoon. It was hard to answer that question, especially when her mother's weary smile only reminded her of how little she could offer in return. I met someone today, she finally said, her voice quieter than she had intended. Her mother looked up, slightly surprised. Met someone? Who? The little girl hesitated, her fingers picking at the edge of the bread in front of her. She had thought about the man's offer all afternoon, but now that the words were on her tongue, she didn't know how to explain it. He was just passing by, she said, her voice unsure. He asked if you were home, and then, he asked if I was okay. Her mother's brow furrowed. What do you mean, okay? Who was this man? The little girl swallowed, trying to form the words. He seemed nice. He wanted to help. He said I shouldn't go hungry. Her mother's eyes narrowed. She took a slow step toward her daughter, her expression unreadable. What did he say exactly? He said he could get me something better to eat. Something more than what we have here, the little girl explained, her voice almost a whisper. For a moment, her mother stood still, her face hardening. Then, without saying anything further, she turned to grab the bags from the counter, not looking at her daughter. Mom, the little girl asked, her voice trembling. What's wrong? Her mother didn't answer right away. She was unpacking the groceries with a sense of urgency, almost as if she wanted to avoid the conversation altogether. But then she finally spoke, her voice tight. Listen to me, okay, she said, her tone harsher than usual. People like that don't just help for free. There's always something behind it. There's always a price. But he seemed nice, the little girl protested. He didn't want anything from me, just to help. Her mother's face softened for a moment, but only for a split second before she hardened again. Sweetheart, don't trust strangers, not like that. It's not the world we live in. The little girl's heart sank. She had hoped, just for a moment, that things might change, that someone could offer help without expecting anything in return. But her mother's words brought her back to reality with a thud. "I just thought," she began, but her voice trailed off as her mother turned to face her. "Enough. Don't let your guard down. Not for anyone," her mother said firmly. "And you won't have to worry about that man anymore." The little girl stared at her, unsure how to respond. Her mother had always been the strong one, the one who knew how to protect them, even when it seemed like everything was falling apart. But tonight, there was something different in her voice, a kind of fear that she hadn't heard before. As the evening went on, the little girl couldn't stop thinking about the man. His offer had felt so out of place, so unexpected, that she couldn't shake the feeling that it had been a dream. But then again, maybe it wasn't. She remembered the way he looked at her with such concern, the way he seemed to want to help without asking for anything in return. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe, just maybe, he had been telling the truth. Maybe he wasn't like everyone else. Maybe he had seen her pain and wanted to do something about it. But then again, her mother's warning echoed in her mind, loud and clear. People didn't help for free. That night, as she lay in bed, she could hear the soft sounds of her mother moving around in the kitchen, the rhythmic clink of dishes being put away, the low hum of the refrigerator, and the occasional sigh. The little girl closed her eyes, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. The hunger gnawed at her again, but now it was accompanied by something else, doubt. Had she imagined the whole thing, or had the man really been sincere? She didn't have the answers, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, someone cared. The following day brought a sense of urgency, and before she knew it, a week had passed since the mysterious man had visited. The little girl hadn't seen him again, but her thoughts remained consumed by the possibility of help, of kindness from an unexpected source. Her mother continued to struggle, and despite their best efforts, the bills kept piling up. There was never enough food, never enough time. But somehow, they always managed to get by. The little girl had learned to live with the bare minimum, always keeping her expectations low, always waiting for the next blow to come. But as the days passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She wasn't sure how or why, but something deep inside her told her that her life was on the verge of a major shift. One evening, just as the sun was setting, she found herself standing at the same door. She didn't know why, but she felt a pull to it, as though something or someone was waiting for her to open it again. She took a deep breath, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She wasn't sure what to expect, but in her heart, she knew she had to find out. The door creaked open, the familiar chill of the evening air brushing against her skin, and as she stepped outside, she saw him again. The man. He was standing just a few steps away, looking up at the sky as if waiting for something. When he saw her, his eyes softened, and for a moment, she saw something she hadn't seen before, genuine concern. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of urgency. "Why?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why are you here?" He looked down at her, his expression thoughtful. "Because I couldn't get you out of my mind. I've been thinking about you, about your situation, and I realized that I can't just walk away." Her heart skipped a beat. The warmth that had filled her that night flooded back, and she felt herself drawn to him once again. This time, though, she wasn't just waiting for the help she had so desperately needed before. Now, she was waiting for the truth. The following days felt like a tug-of-war between hope and skepticism, the weight of both emotions pulling at her heart in ways she couldn't fully understand. Each morning she woke up with a sense of dread, knowing that the familiar emptiness would greet her at the kitchen table. Yet, somehow, the memory of the man's visit lingered, warm and gentle, nestled somewhere deep inside her. It was a feeling she had long forgotten, the kind of hope that could light up even the darkest of days. But her mother's words echoed in her mind, urging her to stay grounded, to not get her hopes up. It was hard to argue with the reality of their situation. The bills were piling up, the pantry was nearly empty, and the days felt longer than ever before. There was no way a stranger, no matter how kind, could change all that. But still, there was a tiny voice inside her, one that refused to let go of the possibility that maybe, just maybe, someone could help. It had been a week since the man's visit, and the little girl's routine hadn't changed. She sat at the same table, in the same house, staring at the same half-empty plate. Every day felt like it blended into the next, like she was caught in an endless loop of hunger, loneliness, and longing. Her mother had grown quieter, more withdrawn, and it felt like the distance between them was widening with every passing day. The evening came, and the soft light of dusk filled the house. The little girl sat in the kitchen, picking at the crumbs on the table, her mind still on the man. Was he really coming back, or had she imagined the whole thing? Her mother had gone out again, her tired figure disappearing into the night, leaving the little girl alone in the house once more. She wasn't scared, she had learned not to be, but there was an unsettling emptiness that filled the space whenever her mother wasn't around. It was then that the knock came again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She didn't wonder whether or not it was a dream. She knew who it was. With a quick rush of adrenaline, she stood up and hurried to the door. Her heart beat faster as she reached for the handle, the familiar tension building in her chest. She opened it, and there he was standing once again in the dimming light of evening. The man. He stood there with the same calm, measured presence, his suit looking immaculate as ever. His eyes met hers, soft but knowing, as if he had been waiting for this moment just as much as she had. "Hello again," he said, his voice quiet but steady. The little girl felt a mix of emotions flood through her. There was relief, yes, but there was also a lingering sense of doubt. What did he want this time? Was he here to really help? Or was this all part of something bigger that she couldn't yet understand? "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man looked down at her for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. "I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation the other day," he said slowly, "and I realized that I can't just leave things the way they are. I can help you. I want to help." Her breath caught in her throat. The words felt so surreal, so impossible, and yet, there he was offering help once again, without asking for anything in return. "Help," she repeated, still unsure of what to make of it. He nodded. "Yes, help. I know you and your mother have been struggling. I've seen it. I've seen how hard it is, and I can't stand by and do nothing." The little girl stared at him, her mind racing. Was this real? Could it be? The man before her seemed so out of place, so different from the people she was used to. He wasn't like anyone she had ever known, and yet his sincerity shone through, like a beacon of light in the midst of her darkness. "What kind of help?" she asked, still unsure. He smiled gently. "The kind that will give you and your mother the chance to start over, to not have to worry about where the next meal will come from, or how you'll keep the lights on. I can provide for that. All I ask is that you trust me." Her heart began to race again. Trust. That was the hardest part. Could she trust him? Could she trust someone who seemed to come out of nowhere, offering something so grand, so I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to think. My mom always said, people don't help for free. There's always something behind it." The man's expression softened, and he crouched down to her level, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way no one ever had before. "I understand your mother's concerns," he said gently, "but I assure you, this is not about me. It's about you and your mother. You deserve better than this. You deserve a chance." The little girl felt the weight of his words, each one sinking into her like a stone. She wanted to believe him so badly, but there was still a part of her that was afraid, a part of her that feared the unknown. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this for me, for us?" The man took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "Because I see something in you. I see potential, and I see someone who deserves more than the life you've been given. And I've been in a place where I needed help too. I understand what it's like to feel lost, to feel like there's no way out." The little girl's eyes widened. She hadn't expected him to say that. She hadn't expected him to acknowledge her pain in such a personal way. It felt real. It felt like he understood. But she started, her mind still clouded with doubt. "What do you want in return?" The man paused, as though weighing his words carefully. "Nothing. I don't want anything from you. I just want to make sure you and your mother are taken care of. You don't have to do anything except the help. That's all." The little girl stood there, feeling a sense of conflict swirl inside her. Could she really accept this? Could she trust this man, this stranger, who was offering her something that seemed too good to be true? She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit, any hint that this was all a trick. But there was nothing, only sincerity, only compassion. And for the first time in so long, She felt like she might be able to breathe again. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice small but filled with a glimmer of hope. The man smiled, his eyes softening. "Nothing at all. Just accept my help. Let me take care of the rest." And in that moment, something shifted. The little girl didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of belief that things could get better. The next few days passed in a haze. The little girl had agreed to the man's offer, though the decision weighed heavily on her. Every time she heard the familiar sound of the door opening, her heart would leap in her chest. She still wasn't sure if she had done the right thing. It wasn't just about trusting him, it was about everything that followed. She had never been in a situation like this, where someone so seemingly different from her life was offering so much. Her mother, however, wasn't so easily convinced. When she came home that night, her expression darkened when she saw the little girl's hesitant, yet hopeful, face. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight. "Who was that man?" The little girl swallowed hard, trying to calm the storm brewing inside her. He came back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said he wanted to help us. He wants to make sure we don't go hungry anymore." Her mother's eyes narrowed. She was silent for a long time, her face unreadable. Then, without a word, she went to the kitchen, unpacking the bags of food she had brought home. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken words. The little girl stood there, unsure of how to bridge the gap between her growing sense of hope and her mother's wary skepticism. "Mom, I know you're worried," the little girl finally said, her voice shaking. "But he's not like the others. He doesn't want anything from us. He just wants to help." Her mother turned to face her, her brow furrowed with concern. "Sweetheart, you don't know anything about him. You don't know what he wants, or why he's doing this." "But he's been kind," the little girl insisted, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't think he's lying. I think he really wants to help." Her mother sighed, setting down the bag of groceries. She took a long moment to compose herself before speaking. "I've seen people like him before," she said, her voice low. "People who pretend to care, only to get something in return. You can't trust that. I've been burned too many times." The little girl felt the weight of her mother's words settle in her chest, but there was something inside her that refused to give up. She knew the man had made her feel seen, for the first time in so long. She couldn't let go of that feeling, couldn't ignore the possibility that there was still some good left in the world. "I know you're scared," the little girl said softly, "but what if this is our chance? What if this is how we get out of all of this?" Her mother didn't respond. She simply turned away, her face hardening with the familiar armor of someone who had been broken too many times to believe in anything good. The little girl watched her mother for a moment, the weight of her doubt hanging between them. The man had offered to help, yes, but there was more to it. He hadn't just offered food or shelter. He had offered something far more valuable, hope. It was the kind of hope that felt too good to be true, the kind that left you questioning whether you deserved it, whether you could hold on to it long enough for it to make a difference. But for the little girl, that hope was everything. It was the first real thing she had felt in ages. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept racing, spinning around the decision she had made. The man's face kept flashing in her mind, the kindness in his eyes, the way he had listened to her, the way he had made her believe in the possibility of change. But then there was her mother, the fear, the caution in her voice, the refusal to trust anyone. The little girl understood. Of course, her mother had been through so much. She had sacrificed everything for them. She had spent countless nights worrying about how to keep them safe, how to keep them fed. But the little girl couldn't ignore the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point they had been waiting for. The next morning, when she woke up, the house felt different. It was still the same cramped, dimly lit space with peeling paint on the walls and faded curtains hanging by the windows. But something had shifted. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling of something just on the horizon. The man had said he would return, and she couldn't shake the thought that this was their chance. Her mother was already up, her tired eyes scanning the newspapers as she sipped her coffee. The little girl hesitated for a moment, watching her mother closely. "I'm going to see him again," she said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. Her mother looked up, her eyes hardening. "No," she said firmly, "you're not going back to him. I've already told you what I think. I won't allow it." The little girl swallowed hard, her throat tightening. She didn't want to fight with her mother, didn't want to make her feel more alone than she already was, but she couldn't ignore the spark of hope that had been lit inside her. "I don't care what you say," the little girl said, her voice trembling but strong. "I'm going to see him. I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to see you struggle anymore." Her mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You don't understand," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "You don't know what he wants. People don't just help because they want to. There's always a price. Always." The little girl shook her head. "Not him. Not this time. I can feel it." Her mother's eyes narrowed, her face tense with emotion. "And what happens when he asks for something in return? What do you do then?" The little girl didn't have an answer. She didn't know what he might want, or if he would want anything at all. But she knew she had to take the chance. She had to find out for herself. "I'm going," she said quietly, her voice soft but resolute. "And you can either come with me, or you can stay here. But I'm going." Her mother's face contorted with a mixture of pain and fear, and for a moment, it felt like the world itself was closing in on them. The little girl could see the battle waging in her mother's eyes. She could see how much her mother wanted to protect her, but also how much she was afraid of losing her. Without a word, her mother turned and walked away, leaving the little girl standing alone in the middle of the room. For a moment, the little girl felt like she might break, but then she straightened up, took a deep breath, and headed for the door. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. The door creaked open, the familiar sound breaking the quiet morning. The little girl stood there, her hand gripping the door frame tightly as if the weight of her decision might pull her back. Her heart raced, each beat louder than the next. She glanced behind her at her mother, who was sitting in the corner, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face unreadable. "You're really going?" her mother asked, her voice soft but firm. The little girl nodded without saying a word. She didn't know how to explain it. There were no words that could capture what she was feeling, the pull of something deep within her that told her this was the right choice. She wasn't just chasing an illusion. She wasn't just running away from their struggles. She was running toward something better, something that might change their lives forever. Her mother's eyes were full of pain and fear, but the little girl could also see something else in them, a faint glimmer of understanding. She was scared, too, but she wasn't the one who had to take this step. The little girl was ready to face the unknown, even if it meant walking into the fire. "I'll be back soon," the little girl said softly, her voice trembling as she spoke. Her mother didn't answer, only nodded in silence. The little girl swallowed the lump in her throat and closed the door behind her. Her hand still shook, but her resolve was stronger than the fear that gripped her chest. She didn't know what awaited her on the other side, but she knew she had to find out. The streets outside were busy as usual, with people hurrying to and fro, each wrapped up in their own lives, unaware of the struggle she was carrying with her. The air was thick with the sounds of traffic and voices, but inside, she felt like she was walking through a fog. Her mind consumed with the decision she had just made. She had never stepped out like this before, never ventured into the unknown, with so much at stake that as she made her way down the street, she thought about the man, his calm demeanor, the sincerity in his eyes, the promise he had made to help. Her thoughts were racing, but every time they threatened to overwhelm her, she took a deep breath and focused on the next step. She had to believe in this, in him. The walk to his office was short but felt like an eternity. She passed the familiar buildings, the small shops that dotted the neighborhood, and the quiet alleyways that seemed to hold so many memories. When she finally reached the building where the man had said he worked, she hesitated for a moment before walking up the steps. The doors were made of glass, gleaming in the afternoon sunlight, a stark contrast to the worn streets outside. She reached for the door and pushed it open, the cool air from inside hitting her like a wave. The lobby was pristine, the floors gleaming, and the walls decorated with modern art. It was the kind of place she had only seen in movies, a place that felt so far removed from everything she knew. The receptionist at the front desk looked up, her expression polite but detached. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice professional and neutral. The little girl swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. "I'm here to see Mr. Harrison. He's expecting me." The receptionist raised an eyebrow but didn't question her. "Right this way," she said, leading her down a sleek hallway. The office doors loomed ahead, and with every step, her heart beat faster. She felt as if she was walking into a world she had never been a part of. When they reached the door, The receptionist knocked gently before opening it. "Mr. Harrison, she's here," the receptionist said with a smile before stepping back and closing the door behind her. The little girl stood there, frozen for a moment. Then, taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The man, Mr. Harrison, was standing by the window, looking out over the city. His back was to her, but he must have known she was there because he turned around as soon as she entered. "You came," he said, his voice warm, as if this were a meeting between old friends. The little girl nodded, her hands trembling at her sides. I wasn't sure if I should. I don't know if this is right." Mr. Harrison's smile didn't falter. He took a step toward her, his presence calming. "It's okay to be uncertain," he said gently. "But sometimes we have to take a leap, even when we don't know exactly where it'll lead. You've already made the hardest part of the decision by coming here." She bit her lip, trying to make sense of his words. She had always been taught to be cautious, to trust only what she could see and touch. But there was something different about this man, something that made her feel like she wasn't just another charity case or someone to be ignored. "I'm ready to help you," he said, his voice steady. "I've arranged for you and your mother to stay at a safe place, away from the struggles you've been facing. And I'll make sure you both have everything you need, food, support, and a chance to rebuild." The little girl blinked in shock. "A safe place," she whispered. "You really mean it?" Mr. Harrison nodded. "Yes, I do. It's not a dream. This is real." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected it to happen like this. She hadn't expected someone to step into her life and offer them everything they needed, without asking for anything in return. For a moment, it felt like she was floating, like she wasn't sure if it was all real or if she had imagined it. But she started, the doubt creeping back into her voice. "Why? Why would you do this for us?" Mr. Harrison paused, his expression shifting slightly. He didn't look uncomfortable, but there was something vulnerable in his eyes, something he hadn't shown before. "I've been where you are," he said quietly. "I've been at the bottom, struggling to keep my head above water. And I know what it's like to feel like you have no way out. But I also know that sometimes someone else's hand is all it takes to pull you up." The little girl felt the weight of his words settle deep inside her. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear them, how much she had longed for someone to understand her pain. "I can't promise that things will be easy," he continued, his voice low. "But I can promise that you won't have to go through this alone anymore." Her chest tightened, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a tear slip down her cheek. This wasn't a dream. This was real. She nodded, her voice shaking. "I believe you." Mr. Harrison smiled again, that same warm smile that had first drawn her in. "Good. Let's get started then." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind. She and her mother were driven to a new apartment, a clean, spacious place, far from the struggles they had been living with. Everything was taken care of. There was food in the fridge, fresh clothes waiting for them, and a sense of peace in the air that she hadn't felt in a long time. As they stood in their new home, the little girl glanced out the window, her eyes searching for something. She wasn't sure what it was, but she knew she had found something that day, a chance to rebuild, a chance to start over. Her mother stood beside her, her face unreadable, but the little girl could see it, the faintest hint of hope in her eyes. They were no longer alone, and for the first time in a long time, the little girl allowed herself to believe that they might just have a future. Days turned into weeks, and the little girl's life began to change in ways she never thought possible. The apartment, once just a dream, had become their new reality. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, but the difference was the feeling of safety, of stability, that had eluded them for so long. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't wake up with a gnawing fear in her stomach. The days were filled with small victories, with moments of joy that had been impossible to grasp before. Her mother, too, seemed to be breathing easier, though her guarded nature remained. She went to work every day, her eyes still shadowed with concern, but there was a new lightness to her step. She didn't have to carry the burden of worrying about the bills or where their next meal would come from. That weight had been lifted, even if only a little, and it made all the difference. One evening, the little girl sat by the window of their new home, watching the world outside. The city felt different from here. She no longer saw the streets as a battleground, but as a place full of possibilities. She thought about the man, Mr. Harrison, who had made this all possible. She hadn't seen him since that day in his office, but she thought about him often. His kindness had been a lifeline, and she knew it wasn't something she could easily forget. Her mother walked into the room, her expression unreadable as always, but there was something softer in her eyes now. "Are you okay?" her mother asked, her voice softer than usual, though the little girl nodded, though there was still a lump in her throat. "Yeah, I can't believe how much things have changed." Her mother looked out the window, her hands folded in front of her. "I know, it's strange, isn't it? It feels too good to be true. It doesn't feel like a dream anymore," the little girl said, her voice full of wonder. "It feels real." Her mother didn't respond right away. She just stared out at the horizon, her face a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. Finally, she sighed and turned to face her daughter. "You know, I've been thinking," her mother began, her voice low. "I never really believed in people like him, people who just want to help. I thought there was always something behind it, but I was wrong." The little girl looked up at her mother, her heart skipping a beat. "You mean it?" Her mother nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I do. I still don't fully understand why he helped us, but I know he didn't do it for anything in return. He just cared." The little girl felt her heart swell, a warmth flooding her chest. "I think he saw us, Mom, not just what we were going through, but us, who we really are." Her mother's eyes softened. "Yeah, maybe he did." For the first time, the little girl felt like her mother truly saw the depth of what had happened. It wasn't just about food and shelter. It was about something deeper, something that went beyond what either of them had expected. It was about trust, hope, and the willingness to accept that there were still people out there who cared. That night, after her mother had gone to bed, the little girl found herself standing at the window again, looking out at the world. She thought about everything they had been through, everything they had lost, and everything they had gained. It had been a long, hard journey, but somehow they had made it through. And now, as she looked at the city lights twinkling in the distance, she knew that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The next day, a package arrived at their door. It was addressed to her mother, and when she opened it, the little girl saw what was inside: more food, clothes, and a note that read, "I know the road ahead is still uncertain, but you don't have to walk it alone. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Mr. Harrison, her mother's face softened as she read the note, and for the first time in a long time, she looked at the little girl with something that resembled hope. "I never thought anyone would do something like this for us," her mother said, her voice quiet, almost reverent. "Maybe there's more good in the world than we thought," the little girl replied, her heart full. That afternoon, they sat down to a real meal: fresh vegetables, bread, fruit. The little girl's stomach didn't ache with hunger for the first time in weeks. The food didn't just nourish her body, it nourished something deeper, something she hadn't even realized she had been starving for: peace. As they sat there, eating together, her mother looked across the table at her, her eyes brimming with emotion. "I know I haven't been the easiest person to live with," her mother said softly. "I've been scared, angry, and I've tried to protect you by shutting myself off from everything. But I want you to know something. You've taught me something important. You taught me to trust again." The little girl smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "I didn't do it alone, Mom. We did it together." Her mother reached across the table, her hand resting gently on her daughter's. "Together," she repeated softly. As the days passed, their lives slowly began to settle into a rhythm. They still had challenges to face, but they faced them together, with the knowledge that they didn't have to do it alone anymore. They had each other, and they had someone who believed in them, someone who had shown them that kindness wasn't a rarity, was something worth believing in. The little girl thought about Mr. Harrison often, but not with the same uncertainty she had once felt. Now, she saw him as a symbol of everything that was possible when people chose to care, when they chose to help, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And as for her mother, the wall she had built around herself was starting to crack. She had learned to trust again, to believe in the possibility of change. Life wasn't perfect, it wasn't a fairy tale, but it was theirs, and that was enough. In the quiet of their new home, with the world outside moving on, the little girl allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope, true hope, the kind that made her believe in the future. And that was the greatest gift of all. The end.